I'm gonna drop a link in the chat for some of the programming stuff that we're gonna be doing. And this does not require any previous knowledge of programming. I tried to make it as accessible as possible so that you can just understand the fundamentals as kind of a prep for a conscious lecture on more machine learning stuff. So the link in the chat is some of the code that we're going to go through. It's all just a basic introduction to Python and then a couple of libraries. Feel free to experiment with the code. I'm going to walk through everything on my side as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share the slides now. And okay, please let me know if there are any problems, but I think this should be working. So I'm going to be doing an introduction to bioinformatics programming in Python. Be talking a little bit about why Python is a great language that is often used in bioinformatics and some of the specific tools that are really helpful in Python. All right, so general stuff we're going to go over is on the slide. So we'll be talking primarily about Python and how it can be applied to the field of bioinformatics, as it tends to be an easier programming language to learn. However, R is another common programming language that is very useful for performing statistical analysis. But that one, I think the syntax is a little bit more difficult than Python, as Python is a very high-level language. So we'll also talk about some of the specific libraries that are available in Python that are commonly used in bioinformatics. Then we'll dive into some of the details of the concept of programming and examples of how they're applied in Python. So we'll go over a little bit more direct syntax stuff with actual code examples. And then lastly, as a kind of a prep for the second workshop on machine learning, we'll take a closer look into the uses of the pandas library with some examples. And we'll also go into the NumPy library a little bit, just because that's another very useful tool in general. So you can follow along with the programming sections with the link in the chat. And I encourage you all to make a copy so that you can experiment, run the code by yourself, and just mess around to try new things. All right, so why Python? Python is extensively used in bioinformatics due to its versatility, ease of use, and a rich ecosystem of libraries and tools tailored for various tasks in the field. Some common applications of Python in bioinformatics include data handling and parsing. So Python is used for efficiently handling and parsing various bioinformatics data formats, such as FASTA, GenBank, and more. So libraries like BioPython provide tools for reading, writing, and manipulating biological data. You can also do some sequence analysis, as Python is crucial for analyzing biological sequences, which includes DNA, RNA, and protein sequences, among others. BioPython offers a lot of functionality for sequence alignment, motif searching, translation, and other sequence-related tasks. You can also do structural bioinformatics, as Python is employed in the analysis of protein structures. Libraries like BioPython and tools like PyMol enable researchers to manipulate and analyze 3D protein structures, perform structural alignment, and visualize molecular structures. So for libraries, which we'll talk about in more detail, Python contains extensive libraries that can be used for visualization, statistical analysis, machine learning, and workflow automation. We will talk about more about some of these tools, as I said, as they're critical in defining how Python can be used efficiently in the context of bioinformatics. There's also a lot of integration with external tools and databases, and Python facilitates the integration of bioinformatics analysis with external tools and databases. So one thing that Python has is easy access to APIs, which is much easier to navigate in Python than in a lot of other languages, in my opinion. And the APIs and libraries available enable seamless communication with databases like NCBI, Ensemble, and others, allowing researchers to fetch and integrate diverse biological information. Overall, Python's flexibility, readability, and extensive ecosystem make it a preferred language in bioinformatics for tasks ranging from data preprocessing and analysis to structural biology and machine learning applications. All right, so now we'll get into the specific libraries that you can use. So there's a constant streams of development in technology for bioinformatics purposes, and this is true for all languages, and there's constantly evolutions in the field. So this is an ever-changing list, but these tend to be some of the most prominent ones that you will frequently see right now. So these are some of the most common ones, starting with BioPython, which I know I already mentioned before, because this is a comprehensive library for biological computation as it provides tools for working with biological data. So BioPython facilitates tasks like sequence alignment, parsing various file formats, and accessing online biological databases. So pandas, which is one of the ones that we'll talk about the most in depth, is a multi-purpose library that is often used for handling and analyzing large data sets, such as those obtained from high-throughput sequencing experiments. And Pandas provides data structures like data frames that are useful for organizing and analyzing tabular data. So this is really good for anything where you have like a large like really massive data set or spreadsheet that you want to be able to reference properly within your code. And then NumPy is another one we'll talk about a little bit more. And it's a fundamental package for scientific computing in Python, simplifying operations on arrays and matrices. In bioinformatics, NumPy is frequently used for numerical operations and efficient manipulation of numerical data, such as in the case of genomics and structural biology. Scikit-Bio is a bioinformatics library built on top of NumPy and other scientific libraries. So it provides some functionality for bioinformatics and computational biology tasks, which include sequence analysis, statistical methods, and phylogenetics. And you also notice there's some overlap between all these different libraries. Like some of them have some overlapping functionalities, and you kind of just have to figure out which one does it better for whatever your purpose is. So next one is scikit-learn, which is a machine learning library used in bioinformatics for various tasks such as classification, clustering, and predictive modeling on biological data sets. It provides a wide range of algorithms and tools for machine learning, making it useful for tasks like gene expression analysis, classification of biological sequences, and more. Um, Lastly, Matplotlib provides a wide range of plotting capabilities, allowing users to create various types of plots, and these abilities are extended by Seaborn. In bioinformatics, these libraries can be used to visualize biological data, such as gene expression patterns, sequence alignments, and genomic variations. All right, so programming in Python. So first, I'm going to talk about like these four main concepts that I think are important to understanding it, and then we'll go into some actual examples of this in the collab worksheet. So Python is a more high-level language than most, which I think makes it easier to learn. And that generally means that the syntax is much more accessible to humans, and it reads more like the English language than other programming languages, such as C. Like C would be considered a very low-level language because it requires a lot more specific variable assignment and memory handling that Python automatically does for you. So that creates an interesting thing in Python where it's much more accessible to write the code, but can be less efficient than other languages because it has to do so many things behind the scenes. So we'll quickly go over some of the basic concepts of programming, and you're welcome to follow along in the collab worksheet or just watch the presentation and then watch me go through everything individually. So first, data types. One of the interesting things about Python is that it does not require type assignment for variables. So most program languages would require you, when you're defining a variable, to determine whether it's a number value or like a letter or a string of letters. But in Python, you can define the variable however you want, and you can even change it, which is generally not the best practice just because it can lead to some confusion in your program, but it is technically valid in Python. So there's a basic integer type for whole numbers and a floating point type for decimal numbers. There's also the string type for textual data that can be much more easily changed and compared than in other languages, thanks to the high-level nature of Python. And there's also a Boolean type, which represents true, false values. This can also be expressed as zeros and ones, just like in binary, which is sort of how the computer thinks. And then there's a lot of different types of there's a lot of different types like tuples, lists, dictionaries that hold multiple data points, but we're going to focus on the most basic one of those, which is a list, which is kind of an ordered, mutable collection of items. So you can change the items within it and easily access stuff at a certain index. So one thing to always remember when programming is that indexing starts from 0, not 1. So the first index is actually 0, and then it goes 1, 2, and so on. In Python, you can also index backwards, starting from the end. And in that case, you would start from -1, and then go all the way back to whatever the length of the data set is. There's some other useful types that we're not really going to discuss in depth just because they're not very useful for our purposes, but that includes sets, dictionaries, none types, and a few others. Understanding Python's diverse data types is essential for effective programming, enabling the manipulation and storage of various types of data in a concise and expressive manner. Each data type serves a specific purpose and plays a crucial role in building robust and flexible Python programs. Okay, so next is loops, which generally are very useful for anything that any operation that you want to repeat several times. So these play a vital role in automating repetitive tasks and iterating over collections of data. Understanding how to use loops effectively is essential for writing efficient and concise code. The choice between for and while loops depends on the specific requirements of the task at hand, and loop control statements provide flexibility in managing the flow of execution within loops. A loop executes a specific block of code for each item in a sequence, which is typically either used with the range function or a list. So you can iterate over every item in a list, or you can iterate for a specified number of times, which you can define using the range function. And the second type of loop, a while loop, repeats a block of code until a specified condition is met. So in the syntax of a while loop, you will specify a certain condition, and this within the loop, you will keep repeating an operation until that condition is met, or you use a certain escape code. So this is more often used when there's not a set number of times that a sequence needs to occur, but rather a specific end condition. To handle multi-dimensional or more complex scenarios, you often use nested loops, so a loop within another loop, if you, for example, need to handle a 2D array. So one of the key parts of loops, particularly while loops, is that you always have to be careful to avoid infinite loops because they will crash your computer. If, for example, you have a loop that's just while true, repeat this, like add 1, then that's always going to be true. So it's just going to keep going and take up all your memory. Yeah, so you always want to have an exit condition to avoid this scenario. So next is conditionals, which are a little bit connected to loops because the while loops essentially have a built-in conditional. And these are just a control structure that allows a program to make decisions based on certain conditions so that you could have multiple paths within your code. So these enable the execution of different blocks of code depending on whether a specified condition is true or false. So I'll go into the details of the divisions between these statements a little bit more later once we get into the code. So there's several different comparison and logical operators available. So the comparison operators are pretty much just what you would see in math, like greater than, less than, equal to, stuff like that. And then the logical operators, it provides a way to look at multiple conditions together. And those are in Python are expressed as words like and, or, not, stuff like that. So understanding how to use conditionals effectively allows programmers to control the flow of their program based on a specific criteria, making their code more dynamic and adaptable to different scenarios. Okay, lastly, we have functions, which are very multi-purpose kind of thing because within a function, you're going to use all of these three other components of programming because a function essentially contains some process that you want to abstract away by just having call a function and then it executes these 10 lines of code. And it makes it much easier to encapsulate and create reusable blocks of codes. It promotes modularity, readability, and maintainability of software. And it really helps just separate out your code to make it easier to navigate. And it's good practice to break down everything into functions because you can reuse code much more efficiently. And because there's no need to copy and paste long blocks of code when you could simply just call a function to do the same thing. Functions provide a level of abstraction, which allows developers to use a function without needing to understand its internal implementation. And this is a lot of what libraries are, because within libraries, you have a bunch of functions, and those functions are just built on Python code. But instead of having to write out all of that code, you just call the function because once someone has created an efficient function, there's no need to rewrite the whole thing all over again. And then because they have parameters and output values, functions are very versatile and capable of handling a variety of inputs. Functions define their own scope with a singular process, which makes debugging programs a lot easier as well. Because of how they break down code into chunks, its functions are really great for debugging because you can test that this specific section of code provides the output that you expect instead of having to run through the entire program every single time. Aside from functional purposes, having code separated out into sections just improves organization and readability. So generally, functions in programming serve as building blocks for creating organized, modular, and maintainable code. They contribute to efficiency, readability, and the overall design of software systems. Okay, so now that we've looked at some of the fundamental concepts, we're going to put this into practice with some examples. So I'm going to switch to yeah, so you should all have the link to this, and we're just gonna go through the first section up until functions to cover like the code implementations of what we just talked about. So this right here is just importing a library. The math library just provides some math functions that I use, and that's not super important here, but it's just an example of one very common library that can be applied to a very wide range of scenarios. So first, this is an example of a Boolean. So your two options here are true and false. They're literally just written as true and false, which is very convenient. In some languages, it's also true and false, but like either all lowercase or all uppercase, and there's no consistency between languages on that. But in Python, very easy to remember. And then strings can be defined using single quotes like this. And in Python, you can also use double quotes. Either of them work. So that's up to your preference. And then we have integers here, which is just anything that does not have a decimal point. And then floating points, which are just decimals. And lastly, we can create a list of, in this case, integers. But for lists, unlike some other languages, Python does not require you to have the same type for all items in the list. So if I wanted to, say, change this to 1.1, I could. So if we run that and it just prints a string, this is a classic Hello World program that introduces you to any language. And it's just printing this string right here. So it prints the contents. And it would print any of these just the same. So if we wanted to print the list, it would print it just like that, which is exactly what we see here. So for conditionals, there's typically the three different parts: if, elif, and else. And you can have any number of elifs in between the if and the else. And these are all considered part of like one joint control block. So this is using the variables here to determine what output you're going to print. So let's see. In this case, it prints hello. So that's because B is true. So this condition here is met, which means it prints this. And because these are all part of the same control block, it automatically skips out of the rest of it. So there's no need to do this. But say we change this to false. Let's see what that does. So now it prints, yes, it moves down to this statement because the I is less than 10 condition is met. But what if I is 11? Then you print F. It's going through all of the statements. And if you wanted to execute more than one of these, you would have to make them part of different statements. So let's say we change these back to what they were at the beginning. So run that and make these all true, then it will print all of them. So that's kind of the power of the if, elif, else, and how it's different from just doing a bunch of separate if statements. All right, next are loops. So we have the two types of loops, while and for. So for the while one, we have a condition, while b. So in this case, it's going to start out true because we have b defined as true up here. And we also start with I equals 1. So this is constantly checking if I is less than 10, and if it is, it adds 1. If I is not less than 10, it changes the value of b. So whenever the value of b changes to false, this condition stops being true, so that will terminate the loop. So we can see that example if we run this, and I just had it printing all the values. So you can see true, 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 all the way down to until b suddenly turns false, and then the loop terminates. And the numbers below are from the for loops. So This first one is an example using the range function. So for j in range 10. And one thing to keep in mind when using the range function is that like list indexing, it starts from 0. So instead of going 1 through 10, like you might expect, it goes 0 through 9. It has 10 values, but it starts from 0. And that's true unless, for example, you can change the syntax, I believe, so that it looks like this. So you can see the original one does this segment right here. And then, so let's see if we change it to this syntax. That should work. Yeah, so you have 1 through 9 instead of 0 through 9. And then next we have the iterating over a list. So as a reminder, we defined our list here, and it has 3 elements, 0, 1, and 2. So this is just iterating over every single element in the list, and it's calling each element, it's storing it in the variable j. So we're printing that variable in each round, which results in the 0, 1, 2 right here. All right. So lastly, we have functions. So I just created some basic functions here using a couple of different ideas, and this is what I use the math function for, the math.squirt. That's taking the square root of anything, which is much easier than trying to calculate it manually. So I created 2 functions here, is odd and is prime. So the is odd function, as you would expect, returns whether or not a value is odd. So this is just the modulus operator, which calculates the remainder. So if the remainder is 0 when divided by 2, then obviously the value is even. So it returns false. And otherwise, it returns true, because that means the remainder was not 0, so it was 1. So the key parts of the function are the parameters and the return value. So starting with the parameters can be anything. You put a variable placeholder here so that you can reference it within the function. So we reference x right here where we're calculating the modulus. And then the return value, in this case, is a Boolean, which determines the output of the function, which you can see is stored right here at the bottom. So very similar thing for the prime function. There's a parameter, which is just some variable x, and it's referenced a couple times within the program, and it determines whether or not this value is a prime using this process of the loop. And then if it determines it's false, it returns false. If it returns yes, it is a prime, then it returns true. And then that output is provided here. So this is something I just created so I could do a little demo, but there's an input function in Python that easily allows you to get input from the user. So we can see how this works when we run this. And let's say we want to check is 5. Yes, it is odd and it is prime. What if we wanted to do 2, for example? It's not odd, but it is prime. So we can see that these functions are returning some value, and then we can print it through this process. All right, so that's kind of the basic stuff of Python. And if you have any questions about any of this, I think put them in the Q&A and Akansh will try to answer them. Yeah, so let me go back to the slides. And next is NumPy. So NumPy is short for numerical Python, which pretty much just describes what it does, because it's a powerful library in Python that's designed for efficient numerical operations and advanced mathematical functions. Its primary purpose is to facilitate the manipulation of large multidimensional arrays and matrices, offering a versatile platform for scientific computing, data analysis, and machine learning. So I was actually, for a math project this week, I was using NumPy so that I could invert matrices and do a matrix multiplication without having to manually implement it, because NumPy has some really great functionality for handling matrices. So NumPy provides a high-performance array object with along with tools for working with these arrays, making a fundamental building block for a wide range of applications. It enhances the efficiency and speed of numerical computations by optimizing memory usage and providing a vast array of mathematical functions. NumPy's simplicity and versatility have made it an indispensable tool for researchers, scientists, and developers working in fields such as bioinformatics, machine learning, and data analysis, where numerical computation and data manipulation are central to the tasks at hand. So I'm actually going to go back to the code now, and we'll look at some of the NumPy functions. So this import NumPy as NP. This is pretty standard for just referencing NumPy as an abbreviation. Typically, if I didn't have this segment, you would have to reference functions in the NumPy library as NumPy dot function name. In this case, you can shorten. You can shorten NumPy to NP. And you'll see that happening, for example, right here, where I can call np.array instead of numpy.array. It's a pretty standard abbreviation. You can technically do anything you want instead of np, but general good practice is to use the standard abbreviations, which in the case of NumPy is np, and in the case of pandas, which I'll show later, is pd. So one of the biggest part of NumPy is just arrays and matrices. So I have two examples here. The first one is a 1D array, and you can see I've defined it like a list here, but this function converts it into a specific NumPy array, which gives it a special functionality that we'll talk about. And then here I have a two-dimensional list that I'm converting to a NumPy array. So to see what those look like, we can see here. And this one you can see has 2 rows to it, with like 2 sets of brackets within the outer brackets. And this is all in one, just like the list that we saw earlier. Except you'll notice it prints a little differently. It doesn't have commas, which is just like a little formatting quirk of NumPy. So the second thing we can do is just describe our arrays. So we can look at all the different attributes, and we can compare also the shapes of the two matrices. So let's look at what those are. So first we have this one, which is just 5. And that 5 represents there are 5 items in the column, or in the row. And in this case, you see 2 values, and the 2 values indicate that this has 2 dimensions. So it's a 2 by 3 matrix, which you can see, yes, there are 2 rows and 3 columns. So data type may look a little bit confusing, but this is just telling you the values within the array are all integers. And then the size value just tells you how many items you have in the array. So if you wanted to see for the matrix what it was, so the two-dimensional one, it gives you 6 because there's 6 total values. All right. So one of the most powerful things in NumPy that I use a lot is just the element-wise operations. So in NumPy, instead of using a for loop to iterate over every single object in an array, you could just automatically perform the same operation to every element all at once. So here we have 2 examples. So result adds the 2 arrays, and instead of having to make a loop going over every single element and adding all the elements, it just automatically does that for you very efficiently. And here I have an example where you take an array and square it, which may not seem like a logical thing, like, oh, is it doing matrix multiplication or something? But what it's really doing is just squaring every element in very efficiently for you. And this is functionality that's really great when you have to handle like large data sets that you don't really want to have to loop over, because NumPy just handles that efficiently for you. And then let's just see what those look like. So 5, 7, 9, yep, that matches up with the sum of these. And then if you square it, yep, that seems like all the values have been squared. One thing to note, this is not an in-place operation. It does not modify the original matrix. It modifies, it creates a copy. So it has to be stored in a new variable like I did here. And feel free to experiment with more operations in your own worksheet if you want. This is just one example of the many mathematical functions available in NumPy. So this, in this case, we have an array of degrees, and we could just call the radians function to modify all the degrees to radians. And then this numpy.sign just takes the sign of every single element and spits it out as a new array. So you can see 0, 0.5, 0.7, 0.8, 1, and like if you're familiar with the unit circle, that does match up with what the sign of these angles should be. All right. So the last 2 things are indexing and then reshaping. So for indexing arrays, it looks a little bit different in some ways because there's some more things you can do with it than normal lists in Python. So we have just a basic array here, and then you can, using this syntax here with the double brackets, you can specify I want index 5, 2, 5, and 8. So 2 would be here, 3, 4, 5, and 8. So if we see what that spits out, yep, you just have the values 2, 5, and 8. And then this is slicing elements from index 1 to 5. And you'll notice that this looks like 1 to 6, but the end value is non-inclusive. So it's actually cutting this segment right here, which is what you get out in the result. So finally, we have reshaping the array. So we have one array with 6 elements right here, and then we want to change it into a 2x3 matrix. So to reshape the array, you just call the reshape function, which does exactly what you think it would do. It creates a matrix that has 2 rows and 3 columns. So let's see what that looks like. Yep. And one thing to note here is that If, for example, we had 7 elements, let's see what that does. It gives you an error because it does not like having something that does not actually fit into this. So what if I gave it 2 more and then said I wanted a 3x3 matrix? Then it works because you can actually divide by that. So you want to make sure these two values multiply to the length of the array. Yeah, so that's some of the basic functionalities of NumPy. And last thing we're going to do is go over pandas. All right, so we're going to talk about some of the basics of using the pandas library. And if you go really deep into pandas, there is a lot of very confusing, very complex functions that can be very helpful, but we are not going to talk about because that would take far too long. So while there's a wide range of operations and tools within the library, we're really just going to discuss the most essential ones, particularly the data structures, which is the key part of pandas. So the most important ones are one-dimensional series and two-dimensional data frames. Data frames are particularly useful in bioinformatics as they allow you to easily load and navigate spreadsheet data through indexing with rows and labeled columns. Using the predefined functions in pandas, loading data into a data frame is only a matter of a couple of lines. So this essentially just allows you to model a spreadsheet in your using a data frame, which is really great for a lot of bioinformatics research, which involves a lot of spreadsheets and a lot of large data that you have to analyze. So once you've loaded in your data, Pandas allows you to view, manipulate, and analyze data. Using data description functions, it's easy to create data summary statistics, navigate rows and columns, and filter data. It's also possible to manipulate data by creating new columns, changing existing values, and cleaning data to eliminate or fill missing values. There are even special functions for unique data types like date-time data. So you can specifically define something as, for example, some exact period of time, and then there's special functions that will allow you to manipulate that. And this is true for a couple of very common data types that might need special functionality. So there's also some basic plotting capabilities using the plot function for data frames and series. These visualizations include histograms, bar plots, and other visualizations for quick insights into the data. However, these capabilities can be somewhat limited in pandas, so they're often extended using additional libraries. And matplotlib, which we talked a tiny bit about earlier, is one of the most important ones. We're not going to discuss that much, but if you are looking to visualize data, that's one of the most common and powerful libraries. And then Pandas also easily integrates with these libraries, so you can combine it well using NumPy and Matplotlib, and also scikit-learn, which Akansh is going to talk about. So these are only a few of the basic functions in Pandas, and there's extensive documentation and an active community that makes it easy for users to find help and resources. There are regular updates and improvements, ensuring that the library stays current with best practices in data analysis. If you'd like to explore further, the documentation is a really great place to start, and I definitely encourage you to explore it and experiment with some basic projects. And then this will be something that is super useful for creating more advanced projects in bioinformatics or just any sort of field that involves data analysis. And so Pandas has significant real-world applicability as it is widely used in data science, machine learning, and yes, bioinformatics. The efficiency and ease of use makes it essential for handling and analyzing structured data in various fields. understanding these key aspects empowers users to efficiently manipulate, analyze, and visualize data using the Pandas library, making it an indispensable tool for data scientists, analysts, and researchers. All right, so lastly, we'll go back to the code one more time to look at Pandas. So this is what I was talking about with the PD. This is the most common acronym for Pandas. It's a little bit just laziness, but it is like standard practice as well to just abbreviate it like this. So here I've just created some random list, and you can see this np.nan is giving you a null value, basically. Like it's the nan, I think it stands for not a number. And then this turns it into a pandas series. And then the second thing we have here is a data frame. So this is creating sort of a random data set, and this is determining the column names. So let's see what these two look like. Yeah, so the series you see come out like this. The not a number value shows up slightly differently, but the rest are floating points. And then you could see you index them pretty much just like normal. So here you can see you've created a 6x4. That's what this is determining. A matrix essentially, and then you're turning it into a data frame by giving the columns names. So the A, B, and C, you'll be able to use those to reference entire columns. You can also, instead of manually entering data, which really, why would you ever be manually entering data? You could just load stuff in from a spreadsheet. And the great thing about Pandas is that instead of having to, like you might with like a text file, and have to like iterate over every single line, you can just tell Pandas read a CSV file, and it reads a CSV file very easily. And there's another example here. I don't have an Excel file saved, but you can also use this. And there's definitely like tab separated values and other types of functions that will read different types of data. So the basic viewing functions in Pandas are maybe not the most like functionally complex, but still useful for just understanding what your data looks like. So this just displays the first few rows of your data using the df.head. And this just gives you a sample of, I think, 5 lines of data. And then you can describe your data, which is exactly what it sounds like. It gives you some summary statistics. And then this is what the column indexing looks like. So it looks very similar to indexing for a list, except you're indexing by a string. And it actually, it's reminiscent of dictionary indexing, which is something we're not going to talk about, but something that some of you might be familiar with. But this will get you all the data into whatever column A is. And then you can also get whatever is in a specific row. So you notice you have to do this dot lock or location to specify that you want a row, because if you just entered 0, it might think that you have like a column with the header 0. That'd probably end up with an error. So this is the basic plotting functionality that exists in Pandas. So here we have like a bar graph and a histogram. So let's see what all of this looks like. So if you remember, this is just a sample of the first few lines of your data. This is giving you all the summary statistics. So it's giving you like the count of total values, the mean value, standard deviation, min, max, percentiles. And this one is, oh yeah, this is all the data in column A. So if we look above here, yeah, it matches the data in column A right here. And then last one, you're getting a row like here, and then you're plotting a histogram like this. So Matplotlib will give you a lot fancier graphs with more options, but this is, if you just want to use pandas, there are options for that. The very last thing is data manipulation. So one thing you can do is combine columns in a way that's very similar to NumPy. So we're creating a new column using this syntax right here and defining it as the sum of A and B. And this will like modify the data frame by adding a column and making it the sum of these, but A and B will remain unchanged. You can also filter your data. So if you want to, for example, just clean all your values, you only have positive values, then you can use this syntax right here that specifies I only want values where the value in C is positive. So that will give you a filtered data frame. And this is not an in-place operation, but creating a copy of the data frame with the filtered data. You can also clean your data. So if you have or are concerned you might have null values in your data, you can use this drop NA function, which just clears any data that has like a row with an NA would just be cleared. And then you can also fill it instead of clearing it by using this, and then it specifies the value to fill it with. So if we run all of that, we can see this one's a little bit shorter because you've filtered out some of the rows. This one has you've added the E column. And in this case, there was no NA values, but if you wanted to, these would be cleared. Okay, and yeah, so that is it. I'm gonna just stop sharing. Yeah, thank you all for bearing with me. Akansh, do you want to have like a 5-minute break, or do you want to go ahead and start?
Yeah, I think let's take a quick 5-minute break and then I'll get into my workshop.
Before we do, we actually have some questions for you, Ria.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Great. So the first one is from your experience between Python and R, which do you get to use more?
Um, So generally, I think I use Python more. I've used it for a lot of different projects between math and data analysis. Though when I did my independent research project, I did actually use R because it was a lot easier to handle some of the like massive data sets that I had to keep like joining and separating. Um, I definitely could have done it in Python, but I've found that learning R was very useful in that context. I think Python is really great for math, especially like in my math class. I just spent like a couple of weeks working on this project where I had to handle a lot of matrices, and Python was definitely the best solution for that.
Also, just to add from my own experience, R is a statistical analysis programming language. It's very powerful and very useful, but it is limited to being statistical analysis based, whereas Python is a general purpose programming language. So it can do, in theory, pretty much anything. But the second question, do you use Python side by side with SPSS, or does the Panda library displace it?
What do you mean by SPSS?
It is another, like MATLAB, it's a statistical analysis tool set.
Oh yeah. When I use Python, I think I pretty much the main ones I work with are NumPy and Pandas that I've used in the past. I don't Pandas Pandas has so much functionality; it can pretty much do anything with data analysis and stuff like that.